The Surge. Ooh boy, are we gonna talk about The Surge? But I'm gonna be frank with you all right now. This review, critique, analysis, whatever you want to call it to make you happy in your little gamer pants, it's gonna be about 85% The Surge 2. Because my total experience with The Surge as a franchise was about 85% The Surge 2, 5% The Surge 1, and 10% me spending time contemplating even giving The Surge 2 a chance in the first place after the shit show of me playing The Surge 1, which was mostly just me doing my damnedest to overlook the first game's, shortcomings. And spoiler alert, in the end I did not. I did not overlook those shortcomings at all. I tried real hard to just suck it up and play the game, and holy shit, I failed that about as spectacularly as your mom failed proper birth control use. And if that made you feel bad, then I suggest you deal with it, nerd, because that didn't make you feel even a fraction as bad as playing The Surge 1 made me feel. Strap in, boys. This one's gonna be bumpy. Spoiler warning here, guys. I'm tackling this one with flagrant disregard for spoilers. And while that only extends to about the first 3 or 4 hours of The Surge 1, I did in fact finish The Surge 2, and I'm gonna talk a healthy bit about the end game. So go play the game now and then come back, or just suck it up because Future Tech Dark Souls land is no place for tears. Speaking of Future Tech Dark Souls, that's pretty much a perfect summary of the Surge series as a whole. It borrows heavily from the Souls and Souls-like formula that everybody knows and loves at this point. It has a similar combat system of light attacks, heavy attacks, dodging, rolling, blocking, equipping, item descriptions, level exploring, shortcut unlocking, damn near non-existent plot. It's all here. The catch is, while there are some notable changes, the biggest being neither of these games comes even close to the quality of anything produced by FromSoft. The Surge 2 forgivably so because, I mean, come on. Even though it's a competent and, dare I say, good game, nobody can really touch Dark Souls, especially The Surge 1 because it's quite frankly a robotic dumpster fire. Also, for those of you who care, I played The Surge and The Surge 2 on PlayStation 4 Pro, so if you're on PC, the technical spit and polish of the graphical side of things may make this whole thing shinier. Not that I think that it's really gonna make a whole hell of a lot of difference on this one. So let's get The Surge 1 out of the way. There's not much I can do to take the sting out of this one. I borderline hated The Surge 1, and that's not something I say about many games. I hated it for several reasons, but the great big overarching one is that I could see the potential for a good game written all over The Surge 1, and I kept waiting for it, and waiting for it, and waiting for it, and it never fucking came. Now, as I said, I didn't finish The Surge 1, so I'll yield some ground and acknowledge that it's entirely possible that after I noped out, about an hour later the game throws the biggest 180 turnaround in the history of gaming and suddenly becomes an unparalleled masterpiece. But honestly, short of exactly that, I don't think there's much redeeming the game, even if it improves because of just how badly it squanders so many chances to be a decent game within the first 3 to 4 hour window. I really wanted the game to be good too. Right from the start, I had high hopes for it. The initial framing of the game in its opening shots, where we see our protagonist sitting patiently with a very specific camera placement, and then it shifts to reveal he's in a wheelchair, is actually really well done from a basic staging and environmental storytelling perspective. And I found myself really intrigued with how the story would proceed with this. I envisioned a whole character arc, a whole introspection on this guy and his disability, navigating an advanced near future with robotic enhancements and future tech. I became even more excited as you wheel him around the environment as he arrives in this giant megacorp facility, talking to guards in hulking robotic exoskeleton suits. And when he gets a rig of his own in a horrifying dystopian procedure.
Rig installation program running. Program complete. Patient sedated. Initiating surgery. Implementing neural link.
I had even more hopes of some interesting character development centering around this. Maybe some introspection on his thoughts and feelings about how he can walk now, and how it feels to have his life change so drastically, and have that mirrored against the certain trauma of the procedure itself. Something he seemingly didn't even know was going to happen, and especially that it wouldn't be so painful and brutal, and if walking and mobility have come at too great a cost once he finds himself entangled in the dangers of the rest of the game. And wouldn't you fucking know it, he wakes up after the procedure, dumped in the middle of a mechanized war zone, and he doesn't say a fucking thing. And I didn't hear him say word one about any of that in the whole 4 hours that I played. He never even acknowledges that he couldn't walk in the first place, or I don't know, the fact that he had a mechanized exoskeleton violently grafted and surgically attached to him while he was wide the fuck awake and screaming in pain. So the game promptly dashes my hopes of an overarching narrative with rich character development and all that fancy book nerd shit. Fair enough. Dark Souls didn't exactly contain the world's most elaborate exploration of the main character, and that was just fine. However, Dark Souls did have a very rich story, if indirectly told, about the world and the history of what came before you, and all the cultures and the heroes of the land that was slowly dying and spiraling into decay. So maybe, just maybe, no wrong.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
Alright, sure, I'll admit, there's something going on in exploration of themes. There's obviously ideas on the table about mega corporations with too much power and not enough responsibility. The evolving relationship between man and technology, and how disposable human life has become as machines have evolved and taken over in the workspace. It's all there. We see notes of this. But during my time in the Surge, it just did nothing. There was no development of ideas, no presenting these problems in any particularly fresh or thoughtful way. This is all basic cyberpunk industrial technological subjects. And just because all these topics are somewhat uncomfortably close to current issues or very near future ones, doesn't make it interesting. Dark Souls got away with a very obtuse, non-linear storytelling style because the world it occupied was deeply intriguing and mysterious, and the player was motivated by surprisingly deft storytelling to tease out the mysteries of the history, heroes, and interwoven cultures of Lordran. So here I need to confess, I had to take a moment to reflect on whether my love of Dark Souls and all that its story did made me negatively biased against the story of the Surge. I mean, once you've regularly feasted on filet mignon, it's hard to be quite as enthusiastic about hamburger, right? No, not at all. I've had plenty of filet mignon, and I fucking love a hamburger, when it's made well. And that's where I've landed on the plot of the Surge, and not to blow a load early or anything, but the Surge 2 as well. I still enjoy a good quality story burger, even after my many helpings of Dark Souls lore filet mignon. But the story of these two games were told as subpar burgers at best. And after all that, I still could have forgiven the Surge and its disappointing story and plot if it had just delivered strongly in other key areas. I'll overlook a lot of faults and flaws in games if it can just nail fantastic, engaging gameplay or an immersive, compelling environment and level design. And if a game can nail both of these, yeah, I'm in. Shitty story and other shortcomings be damned. The Surge nailed neither of these. As far as I can tell, the Surge doesn't own any nails. The Surge might not even know what a nail is. The environment for the Surge is a letdown by and large. I had hopes from the intro for some really interesting and impressive sci-fi vistas and locales, some really interesting tech and cyberpunk flares mixed into some heavily dystopian grunge. Mostly what I saw during my playtime was industrial zones and heavy mechanized environments in various stages of disrepair and destruction as the machines became increasingly psychotic and aggressive and made a mess of every facility I ventured into. This is okay initially, but most of the places I visited quickly blended into a sort of sameness that make navigating the interconnected levels a bit hard to track. Speaking of level designs, this is actually what I would consider to be one of the strong points of the game, which isn't necessarily saying a lot, but there were some parts of the level design that were solid. Although aesthetically speaking, the environments were somewhat blah, there were at least a pretty wide range of shortcuts, loop arounds, unlocked paths, and open doors that all move you forward through the level while also circling going back to a single save/leveling location for each individual stage, a future tech bonfire, if you will. This was probably one of the areas of the game that I was most impressed by, as I found myself more than once thinking, wow, I didn't even see any kind of shortcut popping up there. The environments themselves may be one note, but I didn't mind the layouts and progression of the levels themselves. The way everything circled back to the singular save point instead of having a ton of save points and checkpoints spread all throughout the level really reminded me of Dark Souls 1 level design, as opposed to more recent Dark Souls 3 and on level designs that we see, and those were always the best design levels in my opinion. So as much as I am shitting on the Surge, and it is deserved, the design of the level themselves, specifically the way everything circles back to the save point and really keys into different shortcuts, was well done. So there's your bright note in the shit sandwich. On that high note, however, now we come to combat, and that high note comes crashing down. The combat is where the whole game's already limited momentum comes screeching to a halt. Literally. I'll give Deck 13, the studio behind the Surge, this. An attempt was made. They gave a shot at making Mecha or Exosuit Dark Souls, and unfortunately in the Surge 1's case, it just didn't hit. At all. And that's the problem. Everything feels so slow, so clunky. And that isn't just limited to the big heavy bonk stick style weapons or the super heavy armor style rigs. I can't recall picking up a single weapon type in the Surge that didn't make me feel like I was a beached whale flopping and flailing around, just desperately hoping to luck out and smash into something as I desperately thrashed around. Every swing is so slow and heavy, the enemies are practically unflinching, and your own character moves like he's carrying all the weight of his exosuit on his poor little crippled legs rather than them aiding him or propelling him around. In a world where people are using exosuits to perform superhuman feats of speed and strength, the Surge feels like all this technology amounts to is dead weight. Beyond this, the game is so stingy with weapons and exosuit varieties that I quickly felt completely locked into gear and setups that I hated. And what new loot I did acquire felt frustratingly similar to what I had already had. There's a unique targeting system that allows you to lock onto specific parts of an enemy's body, finding weak points or armored points, smashing off their limbs with finisher moves that allow you to get blueprints for new weapons and armors. There's some degree of strategy there, as you approach each battle deciding whether to target an enemy's weak and vulnerable unarmored body parts, or to focus specifically on getting more blueprints and gear. But these original additions to the genre are underwhelming when the actual combat itself is so lackluster and joyless. I struggled through about 4 hours with this system, waiting for the game to feel better, for the rhythm of things to set in, for the game to click. I really do try to give games a chance to do this, even when I don't initially enjoy them. I legitimately hated Dark Souls when I first played it until that click finally happened. And there have been plenty of other games that do the same. But I just couldn't find it in the Surge. There was no click. I honestly couldn't get away from the game fast enough. And the few redeeming moments couldn't overcome the frustrations of the basic fundamentals of combat and gameplay. I don't think I've ever felt as satisfied and disappointed in such equal measures as when I yeeted the Surge off my hard drive. With all of that understood, I very, very nearly skipped the Surge 2. I was ready to write the entire game off, but I was told by a few people that I really should give it a shot, even with how disappointed I was with the original. I'm not ashamed to say I was pretty vindictive when I booted the Surge 2 up, and I was already hellbent on making any review as scathing and grouchy as the first one. I was smug as fuck thinking about how I would play the Surge 2 for an hour and then just rip it and all the people who insisted I play it to shreds. The degree to which the Surge 2 improves upon its predecessor and the amount of enjoyment and surprise I got out of it is nothing short of shocking, and I'm a big stupid dumb idiot for ever being so close to not giving it a chance. As vastly disappointing as The Surge 1 was, the sequel improves on almost every area to such an extent that I'm at something of a lack of words. These two games shouldn't stand side by side. This isn't to say The Surge 2 is perfect. It's not. It has its shortcomings, and some of them are glaring. We'll get into that shortly. It isn't any sort of Game of the Year contender, and it's not going to go toe-to-toe with the top of the industry or even the best of indie games. But I think it's worth saying right off the top that The Surge 2 improves upon the original game in so many ways that Deck 13 Studios honestly deserves some kind of serious kudos for taking a game that I couldn't even bring myself to finish in The Surge and bringing it up to an experience that I happily played all the way through in The Surge 2 and walked away actually able to recommend to people. Let's start with graphics and visuals. Graphically speaking, both The Surge and The Surge 2 aren't doing anything special in either direction, positive or negative. Both games are a little aged now, they're both a few years old, but even at release, neither was breaking any grounds. For all that, the game isn't hideous, and the graphical fidelity is smooth enough that it isn't going to cause any major distractions. As far as art direction, I can honestly say that The Surge 2 takes a step up in terms of quality and cohesive vision and presentation. Character models and enemy design range from interesting and stylish and boring without ever really crossing into the what the hell am I looking at territory. I can't recall any characters looking so fugly that I questioned their existence, but there were several NPCs that I looked at and then a nanosecond later forgot they even existed because of how cookie cutter and unremarkable they looked. The real standout in terms of characters and models is definitely the exoskeletons and weapons, which are far more varied and visually striking than in The Surge 1. We'll dive more into that later. In terms of enemy design, this is a pretty mixed bag and somehow managed to be both shit and interesting at the same time. Most enemies you run into are different variations of dudes in exosuits. The enemies themselves are fairly flavorless and either fit into street thug types, police and military grunts, and the more sophisticated and highly trained military tough guys. That's pretty damn boring, but there is a decent variety of different exosuit rigs that they have equipped, and that serves to break up the monotony based on specific designs of weapons and armor, if nothing else. There's a few more enemies on offer in the form of various mechs and machine adversaries, and most of them do some form of electrical damage, which stuns you momentarily, long enough to make sure you're big time dead. So I hate these guys, and you'll never convince me they're okay. I mean, I'm glad they're in the game just to break up the monotony of a generic guy in a mech suit, but that aside, fuck these guys, and I mean that with the most sincerity that a soulless ginger can possibly muster. There's also the nano beast that comes into play later in the game when we start to see just how bad the nanite virus and all its various manifestations and mutations are. These purple pissers are a handful all on their own and will stack nano elemental damage on you very quickly, which will hit you with a high amount of burst damage if the meter fills up. Still, I'll take them over the electro bitch bots any day. They also allow a big beastly monster type enemy to be put into a game that actually fits into the lore and seems doable even in the future tech setting, so that's a nice little touch, though if I'm honest, when you encounter your first nano beast, the game hadn't really explained the whole nanite virus thing and the way that machines can create organic matter to form into these beasts, so I called bullshit initially, but now we're fine, don't worry about it. It also bears mentioning that there are seemingly more bosses in The Surge 2 than its predecessor.
Whoa, boss, what? Shit! I'm sick of her telling me what to do! Little Johnny is getting angry!
But it seems to me that a lot of these encounters were spaced kind of unevenly, keeping the early game fairly sparse on bosses and increasing the frequency of encounters later on. It's possible that The Surge 1 had a similar distribution of bosses and I just didn't get far enough into the game to get to the real meat and potatoes of boss fights, so take this comparison with a grain of salt. Either way, the bosses in The Surge 2 were pretty enjoyable to fight. None of them were super unique in terms of approach or method, no gimmick bosses for the most part, although targeting specific parts of the boss to weaken them and the way that they would sometimes change behaviors and attack patterns in response to those parts being damaged did seem to give some degree of variation. Still, for all that, you were mostly approaching them the same. Target a body part, wail on it till it breaks, fight the boss some more. That sounds pretty boring and downplayed, but honestly the pacing of gameplay and the flow of battles were such that the game bosses were plenty satisfying to take on, even if they didn't all have an incredibly unique look in terms of gameplay. Let's talk about setting, environment, and level designs. The Surge 2 takes place in Jericho, a fictional city under quarantine during the outbreak of some kind of techno-virus driving many of the inhabitants of the city mad. And it's immediately a far more compelling and varied setting than the first game. The Surge 2 throws a lot of looks at you, with city streets and alleyways to explore, rooftops, a dock, nightclubs, an animal and wildlife sanctuary, a prison, shopping malls, slums, elegant high-scale shops, a refugee center, a hospital, subterranean tunnels, subways, military installations, and more. Now granted, I didn't explore the total sum of locations in the Surge, but within the first 4 hours or so of gameplay, I'd already seen so many more memorable and varied locations than in the first game that by comparison, the Surge 2 is far more engaging, refreshing, and memorable than its predecessor. It keeps the nicely interlocking levels with the many shortcuts and double backs and varied routes to get back to the bonfires. It's always going to be bonfires. You'll never convince me otherwise. Fight me. And there's some unlockable features you access in the late game that really expand your options for traversing the environment. Again, more on that later. Overall, the level design in the original Surge was its one highlight. And the Surge 2, if anything, makes the design even tighter while adding a lot of depth to the actual presentation of the levels and the design of the environments, and keeping it all engagingly meaningful to the story being told. And it's a good thing too, because the story... I really want to be able to say better things here, guys. Because for all its flaws, it's obvious to me that Deck 13 at the very least tried to make a more engaging and involving story for the sequel. I'll again point out that I didn't play the full game for the Surge, so I missed a lot of what the actual experience of the story is. But I did at least do some research into the original game's story with videos and synopses for the sake of this review, and I can definitely say they tried to make this go around with the Surge 2 a bigger, more complete, more interesting story. We play a creative character, which means we have zero set personality or backstory or opportunity for real further character growth or development the way a pre-made set-in-stone character would. But considering how much they squandered Lieutenant Dan in the Surge 1 and gave him zero character or growth, I think it's about even, to be honest. Most of our story centers around trying to find and rescue a girl named Athena, who we don't really know much about, but are drawn to for... reasons. This search plays out in tandem with the evolving changes in the city centered around the nanite virus and eventual emergence of the nanite swarm taking over the city, threatening destruction of Jericho and everyone in it. We find out these events are no coincidence, as Athena herself is connected to the swarm because of... reasons. I'm gonna be honest with you, I have no idea. The game tried to explain itself and my eyes glazed over and came out of my mouth until the game shut up. Suffice to say the story and its telling, while an improvement over the original Surge, is less than stellar. But in the game's defense, this time it didn't have to be, as it did a lot of other things very well. One thing it did not do exceptionally well is audio. I can't really say too much about the music because I honestly can't remember a single track. Literally, I'm sitting here mulling over my whole experience with the Surge 2 and I can't come up with a single note or tune from the game. There's a certain irony to this considering the Surge 1 burned, "I was born in a prison."
I was born in a prison with no hope for escape. I got used to the silence as I stuck in my cage. You cannot miss what you have never seen before. But deep inside you know there must be more. You cannot miss what you have never seen before. But deep inside you know there must be more.
So deeply into my brain that I came real close to sticking a spork into my ear in a vain attempt to claw whatever gray matter that song inhabited right out of my fucking skull. As far as sound effects and the like, the game's okay. At no point did I sit there thinking to myself, holy shit, listen to the metallic clang on that attack. This this is gonna be genre defining. But everything was properly in place, fights sounded the way they ought to sound, everything was nice and thunky and weighty in all the right places to emphasize the battles, so I'm relatively content with that. If I'm being real honest, it's pretty rare that I play a game and I think to myself, wow, this game is really made by its sound effects. On the other hand, when sound effects are completely off and super poorly designed, you can generally tell. But the place where the Surge 2's audio really falls off and my ears really start to take some punishment is the voice acting. Now I'm gonna preface this by extending an olive branch of understanding that Deck 13 is not a monolith juggernaut of a dev studio. I don't know what kind of budget they were working with, but I have no doubt it wasn't the type of money they would need to hire the absolute best of the best in the voice acting industry. That said, I think we all know that there are dev studios out there that are tiny underfunded studios that have put out some really amazing voice performances without much resources to work with, so you can only cut them so much slack. I don't know that this is the worst voice acting that I've ever heard.
How's the spare part hunt going, sweetheart? Without you, a lot of people would have gone hungry tonight. Your reward is waiting in the cooling chamber.
But I also don't know that it's not. That's an exaggeration, but nonetheless, it was bad. Bad enough that I frequently found myself laughing in awe at how jarringly bad the voice acting was. Even during serious moments, I would just laugh because I was struck by how extremely off it all was, taking some really weird choices for mood. Several blocks of dialogue read in a totally normal conversation but had a hyper-aggressive delivery, and some were supposed to be moving or urgent or distraught and were just read in such a deadpan lack of emotion.
Disemboweled him right in front of my eyes. Damn bitch said she was gonna keep me for dessert. I thought I was a goner for sure. I suppose I should give you some kind of reward for saving me.
I seriously contemplated more than once to just turn the voice acting off entirely to spare myself the horror of the entire experience. And I think ultimately the only reason I didn't is for the same reason why you watch a horror movie that's so horrendously made, it just becomes a hilariously horrible experience. This thing's so low into terrible that it somehow laughs itself into being great again in the most unintentional way possible. Let's get into the real meat and potatoes of what the Surge 2 has to offer and where it really starts to hit a turnaround. The gameplay. Starting with what carries the majority of the game, which is of course the combat. And let me tell you, in almost every way that the Surge failed in combat, the sequel succeeds. Right off the rip, even in the tutorial area in the early stages, combat immediately feels drastically improved. Where the first game seemed borderline obsessed with clunking and lunking about, the Surge 2 really has smoothed things out drastically. From the dodging, the weapon swings and attacks, the combos, the fluidity of engaging enemies, everything is so much more streamlined and viable. It's like playing a game by an entirely different developer, one who has its shit together from the word go and only builds a better experience from there. There's a lot of ground to cover on what makes the Surge 2's combat superior and an honestly enjoyable, engaging experience. But two of the most essential elements work in tandem to make combat the identifiable, intense, fast-paced, always engaging affair that it is. Dodge and movement systems and your health and battery management. These elements are almost a nod to the faster quick step dash and rally or health regen system from Bloodborne, in which you can regain a portion of lost health if you attack your enemies quickly after being hit. While this isn't exactly a one-for-one recreation, in the Surge 2, you accrue battery charges by attacking and damaging enemies before those batteries have a chance to drain. Battery charges can then be used for various purposes, primarily to regain lost health. Like in Bloodborne, these systems highly incentivize and encourage aggressive play and rapid engagement. The much improved dashing and speed boosting making your rig feel like an agile, supercharged augmentation that surpasses human limitations rather than the weighty, clunky husk of the Surge 1. Boosting in, rapidly attacking with a fluid set of combos, dodging out and healing as needed to survive the frantic, speedier, more aggressive combat, both your enemies and your own, feels almost indescribably good when you compare it to the complete lackluster combat of the original Surge. Adding to these two biggest and most important changes to the gameplay loop, attacking in itself feels drastically improved. Deck 13 really did some strong work, and I have to give them some props for their melee combo system, as in many cases it's more intricate and expansive than the combos of even Dark Souls itself. putting together a sequence of moves that you can move into one set of combos or another, depending on how you string together your vertical or horizontal attacks. This combined with running attacks, dodging attacks, sliding attacks, jumping attacks, and charging attacks give you a surprising wealth of attack options that seem entirely lacking in the first game. Additionally, there's an expanded directional-based parrying system introduced in the Surge 2 that offers a lot of opportunities for powered-up counterattacks and high damage output for those skilled with parrying and timing enemy attacks, and this reminded me pretty strongly of the directional block parry system in For Honor. I think it's a great idea, and I've heard a lot of people speak very favorably about this system. But I can't speak too authoritatively on this aspect of the game systems because as soon as I found the evade button and how zoomy it was, I never looked back. And I mean that literally. I took the augment that you have to have equipped to see the directional parries out of my loadout, and I don't think I used the block button the entire game. Zipping in and out in a constant hit and run attack was far too much fun for me to slow my aggressively murderous pace, but those who are looking for a more methodical and deliberate, controlled approach to encounters have plenty to work with. All of these expansive options only become even more impressive as you realize just how many different types and classes of weapons there are to choose from. Every class of weapon has a stunning amount of options for individual weapons, and a lot of them are actually completely viable for good offensive options. These weapons can also be combined in various meaningful ways with the armor sets. To add even more depth to customization options, equipping armor in sets, partial or complete, give you a wide range of perks and augments that can range from increased experience, more effective healing, increased resistance against certain damage types, extra damage dealt against specific enemy types, a buff to a particular type of weapon, and more. Adding to this the various support drones that you can find and the type and function or damage they inflict, as well as the augment implants that you can equip that serve a huge range of features and improvements to your character, give you a depth of build versatility that I found surprising in its variety and adaptability. It's worth mentioning that there's a good variety of finishers that you can execute on enemies as well, with each weapon type having a wide range of distinct finishing moves dependent on which body part you have targeted once you finish your opponent. These finishers all function the same, with the only real difference coming from the visual presentation of the delightfully over-the-top finish of your battles. And that's perfectly fine because the finishers make me feel like a badass in the same way that glory kills in Doom and Doom Eternal make me feel like a badass, and are thereby an essential part of the game. I have no shame in admitting that I tried out several weapons and weapon types that I had no interest in just to see how the finishers looked, and I ended up finding several new weapons that I used for a solid stretch of the game as a result. The upgrade system for weapons and armor is accessible and smooth, letting you get upgrade material of different grades by cutting off the body parts specific to the part of your rig you are attempting to upgrade. You can even break a higher grade part down to be used to upgrade a lower tier armor or weapon piece. This meant that while I did occasionally have to do a bit of farming to upgrade my chosen loadout to its highest level, it was surprisingly minimal, and I was even actively upgrading newly discovered equipment sets and weapons that I discovered late into the game. This kept me from feeling overly invested in starter equipment that I'd put a lot of resources into early game, and lacking enough proper upgrade material for late game armor and weapon finds, as has often been the case in many Souls and Souls-like games. I loved that I found a whole new set of useful gear in one of the very last stages and was able to quickly, and with minimal grinding or effort, make it on par and even better than the set I'd previously been using. It's fortunate the combat loop and build min-maxing was so well executed for the sequel because the game leans hard on it. There's undeniably a lot of areas that the Surge 2 improves upon the original. I dare say damn near every area I could think of, in fact. But there are still several aspects that do come up short and are just generally subpar, especially in as competitively stacked and robust a field as the Souls-like action RPG genre. The improvements are numerous and noteworthy enough to be worth more than a little respect, and the combat alone stands out strong enough to put the whole game on its cybernetically enhanced back. Despite all this glowing praise I have for the Surge 2, and believe me, I'm happy to praise this game for how well it stands head and shoulders above the original, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the drawbacks and negatives that really left an impression conversation with me. Some of them are fairly minor, some of them are balanced out by positives, and some are outright glaring blemishes on what I would otherwise consider a solidly improved game. The healing system that I praised a few minutes ago, the one that keeps you heavily in the fight and really lets you keep the pace high and action-packed, I stand by that whole system being great. But it also in some ways really trivializes the fight once you get really competent at the game, spec out your loadout, and have certain augments that let you gain energy and battery charges as fast or faster than you can use them, keeping you perpetually healed up. In the later parts of the game, I was diving headfirst into each battle with any and every foe I encountered, completely disregarding any strategy or pacing, smashing my way through them and healing through any and all damage coming my way as I unflinchingly smashed everything that crossed my path like some kind of mecha Hulk. Somewhere amidst the carnage, I missed the risk and consequences, the constant threat of failure of Dark Souls and other Souls-like games, where even at an advanced level you could get smacked down by relatively common enemies if you got too cocky. At some point, the Surge 2 lost all its tension. Its teeth were gone. I smashed them all out with my big robotic fist, and without its bite and the constant challenge of working to keep the entire world from burying me under the weight of its pervasive animosity, an important piece of the Souls-like formula was lost. See, I love Souls games, and I love them specifically because I always feel like I have to squeeze out every advantage, every minuscule shred of strength, just to survive the ceaseless onslaught of hostility bearing down on me and trying to engineer my horribly painful death. That challenge and that struggle define Souls-like games for me, and I love them for that. And by the mid to late game, the Surge 2 loses any semblance to that adversity, and in many ways, the game is poorer without it. However, I also love being a badass fusion of man and machine, utterly wrecking balling my way through every enemy in my path, smashing everything in sight under my mechanized might and completely tanking everything thrown at me because none of the pathetic peons in my way have my 4.0 upgrades that give me technological superiority in the form of slinging several tons of metal at my enemies' collective faces with turbo boosters on the back to make sure they really know I mean business. Considering how the original Surge made me feel slow, plodding, and ultimately powerless as I lunked random metal objects around with all the grace and usefulness of a brain-dead Roomba bot headbutting the same wall for the 50th time, yeah, I'll take the fucking power fantasy, thanks. In a similar vein of things that are great but also kinda suck, the late game traversal system and the reorienting of levels end up being both a highlight for me as well as a bit of a dud. Toward the late game, you finally acquire the equipment needed to traverse many zip lines and magnetic lifts that were off limits to you for the majority of the game, opening up a wide variety of shortcuts and quick routes across the city, bypassing huge chunks of zones and stages, and access to hidden areas previously inaccessible. I have some mixed feelings on this system, specifically how late into the game it's unlocked and finally made available. On one hand, I feel like this really should have become accessible way earlier, letting us access hidden areas and extra goodies much sooner and making itself a more significant element of level design and navigation. I would have loved to have access to the zip lines and lifts for a bigger portion of the game, and it would have made the already solidly designed levels into an even more engaging experience as our options expand. It was a wasted opportunity to make levels more engaging using these mechanics. On the other hand, keeping these game elements held back until the late game made that part of the game more distinctly different and memorable in its own way, particularly given that a big chunk of the late game is retraversing previous areas. Due to some cataclysmic events involving the nanite swarm, the layout of our familiar zones have changed fundamentally, with many paths and routes blocked or destroyed. The zip lines and lifts come into play here, letting us navigate through these levels in ways we couldn't previously and allowing alternate routes and options to get around the dead ends and destroyed paths as we make our way to the late game objectives. In this sense, the game makes retreading familiar areas fresh, new, and engaging, saving what would have otherwise amounted to the most boring segment of the game and making it actually interesting and relevant as everything gets reoriented around both familiar areas with an all-new layout, but also allowing us to fully explore and engage with these new traversal mechanics in a more direct and focused manner. I do wish they'd introduced these systems earlier, but maybe in a more limited and controlled way before really opening up full access to the zip lines and lifts for the endgame. As with the healing system, it's a relatively minor complaint that I don't really have the answer how to make better, and I can't say it approaches anything even close to game ruining, so it's a pretty minor blemish. A much more significant detractor for the game was the handling of Athena. This falls under my general story grievances, but with Athena, it's a particular sticking point for me. In particular, how much of a focal point for the entire story Athena is. It's a huge failing from a narrative and storytelling perspective, how little Athena actually has to do with anything. Really, our entire primary quest is to find Athena. Finding Athena takes precedence above and beyond confronting any of the minor or major antagonists of the game, beyond escaping, beyond even surviving for the most part, as we find ourselves frequently going toward danger for the sole reason of finding and protecting Athena. Athena also becomes the quintessential chosen one who ends up not only bringing about the giant nanite cataclysm that threatens to destroy Jericho and everyone in it, but also the only person who can confront the nanite swarm and get it to chill the fuck out. And for all this, Athena is barely seen at all in the game, almost entirely in flashbacks, and even then only in a very hazy, indistinct sort of way. By the time the credits rolled, I sincerely thought that the lack of character development for Athena was maybe the biggest failing of the entire narrative. It's honestly fine that there is essentially no character development for us, the player character, because we're a create a character. We're just the guardian, the strong arm there to protect Athena and deliver her to her destiny, or whatever vapid, threadbare drivel the game tries to justify your presence as. It doesn't matter. The point is, as a create a character, we don't exactly have a lot of place for growth or character development, or really a character arc of any sort. This is perfectly fine. It's pretty standard for most Soul-like games. But that isn't who or what Athena is presented as. She's the key, the linchpin of this whole story. The person who we are centered upon finding and protecting. And she's just nothing. No one. She has no more character arc or growth or story than our own blank slate of a character. And it really is a total shame because so much could have been done with her to give her something, anything of meaning in this dry ass story to make me care about what was happening beyond finding the next cool piece of gear or the next target to go Mecha Hulk smash on. Looking back over this video, this probably all sounds like a mixed bag at best, and yeah, I guess it kind of is. The Surge 2 is no masterpiece. It has its rough spots and its jagged edges, and there are parts of the games that are outright letdowns and disappointments. But for all that, I honestly, no bullshit, enjoyed my time playing it, and I think there are areas of the game that are really strong and did enough for me to overlook the low points of the overall experience. It helps, I think, if you go into the game not expecting a sweeping masterpiece of gaming art and instead just look for a fun time. It delivers that, at the very least. It also helps to go in with the perspective of what the Surge 1 was and what the Surge 2 became. Knowing what a rough experience the Surge 1 was and how much I disliked the game, and contrasting that against the Surge 2 and how enjoyable its core gameplay loop was, really leaves me with a sense of respect for Deck 13 and what a leap forward they made in a single sequel. The game isn't perfect, but it's obvious that a lot of effort went into making a solid step forward in quality from one game to the next, and that should be recognized and commended. The Surge 2 could have been more of the Surge 1, and I wouldn't have given it an hour max before yeeting it off my hard drive just like its predecessor. Instead, I can't help but recommend this flawed but enjoyable game. Well done, Deck 13. Now please, for the love of God, work some similar magic on Lords of the Fallen 2. If you were able to make this significant of an improvement between the Surge and the Surge 2, I can only imagine the gap of quality between Lords of the Fallen and a sequel. It may just be the biggest we fixed it story in gaming if you can deliver. Thank you for checking out my review. Do the sub thing or just tell me how good or bad I am at this YouTubing thing in the comments if that's your jam. Big thank you to my Patreons for funding my slow descent descent into madness. If you're financially irresponsible and would like to fund a subpar YouTuber struggling to become a mediocre YouTuber, link to my Patreon in the description below. I've got more Elden Ring lore videos and game reviews in the cooker now, so I'll have more content for you guys in the next 3 weeks to half a year, depending on how concussed I am between now and then. Stay salty, nerds.